Welcome. Statistical computing can be a scary thing when you don't know where to start. So in this video, I'll try to walk you through some of the basics of computing in R. In this video, we'll touch on stuff like how to install R and how to install RStudio, what RStudio is and what R is, how to run basic R commands and functions, and how to save your work when you're working in R, as well as some basic tips and tricks, and also how to search R documentation. So let's get started. What is R? R is an open source programming language. Open source meaning free. It's a language that supports data analysis, graph design, and just general computing. It's most used in school settings for statistical analysis and graph design. Although industry does sometimes program in R. Yeah, so that's basically R. Let's download it. So in order to download it, what you want to do is go to your the search engine that you use. Just type in R for Mac, or if you're using Windows, the alternative. And this should pop up for you, https / cran.r-project.org. There you go. And then you just want to download this first link. Now, if you do have an older what they call legacy machine, you can download an old version. So you just have to, depending on what kind of operating system you have. I feel like we have the newer operating systems already installed on our computer, but if we don't, a way to check is to go up here to this Apple logo in the menu bar and then click on About This Mac. And it'll tell you what OS that you're running. Anyways, let's go ahead and click on this first one. It's for High Sierra and higher. I have High Sierra. So I'm going to click on that, and then you should see a little drop down right there, installing. Now you want to go ahead and open it and install all the dependencies. So continue, agree, install. There we go, and install. So let's close that. We can move the installer to trash. So now what you'll see is we've got, if we do open up R, we'll have this little console pop up. This is similar to like a terminal console in a Mac. And so this is just the bare bones terminal of R. So this is what kind of programming in R entails. A very helpful tool is something called RStudio. So RStudio is something called an IDE. An IDE stands for an integrated development environment. That's what an IDE is. And so what it basically is it allows you to do a little bit more with R, with pre-programmed in tools. So we won't save this. I just want to show you what the R terminal looks like, and we'll come back to it, but in a little more expanded version. So let's go ahead and install RStudio, this IDE that I was talking about. So for RStudio, just type in RStudio for Mac or for Windows, depending on what system you're rocking. And here you want to go to Products, RStudio for desktop or RStudio for server. You can use it on their server, but in this video, I'll showing you how to download it for desktop. So you want to go ahead and click on install for desktop and download for Mac. Very similar process to what happened with the actual R terminal. Okay, so then it's in applications. You can go ahead and drop it down there. And now let's go ahead and open our studio. Okay, here we go. And this is our studio. Now, it's not going to look, yours is not going to look quite like mine. Let me show you what yours will probably look like. Let's open up a new R script there. Um, let's go ahead and clean these. Okay, so this is more or less, I think, let's reload this. More or less, this is what yours will look like upon download. So just basic features. What you've got is a script area. Oh, yours will probably load, now that I think about it, it'll probably load something like this. So it won't show the script. What you'll want to do is you'll want to click on this little tab and it'll show the script area. So this is basically like text edit. It's a place where you can write a, let's say, program before you want it to run. So it's a place where you can kind of work through problems and commands without actually having them run, because here in the console, every time that you do enter in enter in, let's say, a command x minus y, and you click enter, it's actually going to run. But in this script here, if you enter an x minus y and you click enter, this is just going to take you to the next line and on and on. So this is just a text editor. However, why this is useful is because you can, number one, save your work, and number two, you can run commands straight from the text editor. By clicking this button called run right here. And so that'll run line by line your code. You can also select it all and run it. So we'll go through an example like that. So start off in the beginning. So you downloaded our, oh, and I forgot to mention this little broom here. This cleans this console. It also, well, you could delete it right here. This, I forgot to mention, is called your environment. So it's your environment. What that basically means is if you run a simple command, so if you label name x as equal to 1, that is going to show up as a vector in your environment. So what an environment is a place to save your variables that you're currently working on. And it's also a place for you to know what kind of variables you already have saved into R, right? What kind of variables R is aware of. So let's go ahead and clear that. Rooms. Okay. So when you first install R, the basic version of R comes with basic operations. So adding, dividing, multiplying, subtracting. So basically, operations that a calculator, that a desk calculator could do. But what makes R special, right, especially for statistical computing, is that is the attention of statisticians and computer scientists providing us with functions that allow for complex statistical analyses. And so this is why we really care about R. And so one of those packages, one of those very useful tools, is called the StatSite package. It's authored and maintained by Dr. Douglas Bonnet from the University of California, Santa Cruz. And this package includes most of the tools that is readily used when you're doing statistical analysis, although there are others. But let's go ahead and try to install and load this package, and I'll explain kind of what that is as we're going through it. So to install in our package, I'll do this in the text edit just so that we can follow along. So this is instructions for installing and loading packages. Now, this is another little aside. When you're working in text edit and you put a hashtag before text, the computer does read it, but it doesn't treat it as a command. It treats it just as words. So it'll print, right? But it won't run it as a command. It'll know that you're just writing it, that it's just text. Okay, so now we can start with the actual command. So how in the world do we install packages? Well, there's a handy, you could do it in two ways, actually. The first way is you go to Tools up here, and you go to Install Packages in your menu bar. And then you can go to CRAN repository packages, and then you could type in stat psych. It pops up right there, and you just click on install, and it installs it. So that's the first way to install a package. The second way to install a package is actually running a command, install.packages. Now, this is something you'll notice if before you've only used the basic kind of console in R, is that RStudio fills in the functions for you. So when you type in half of a function, it'll fill the rest in for you. It's very useful. So all you have to do is kind of click enter, and it'll load that specific command for you. And so install.packages, and then you want to make sure you put parentheses, and then you put stat psych, so the same package that we were talking about. And then you click enter. Okay. And so when we run this, what this will do is it will install, the stat psych package. So let's go ahead and try doing that. Let's go ahead and run that line of code. Okay, and then don't get alarmed. You'll see this red text. It'll look cool. And what you're basically looking for is that there's no errors, right? This says downloaded, downloaded, great, and then it shows you where the packages are downloaded in. Okay, awesome. Yes, so the next thing we need to do, so installing packages is only half the battle. The next thing that we'll have to do is something called loading the function. So this is installing. Let's go ahead and label that. So installing our, let's see, stat psych. Let's use that. And then the next part of it is actually loading, loading stat psych. Okay, so in order to load stat psych, this is another function, right, that you can use. Oh, let me go back just a second. So you will not have to install packages into R any more than the first time that you do it. You will, on the other hand, do have to load the package every time that you have a new script. Not just a new script, but each time that you clear your environment, if you'll pay attention to this kind of disclaimer, there's a little checkbox here, and it says include hidden objects, and the hidden objects are all the packages. So these are all the packages that you've installed. If you have that clicked, it wipes the packages that you have loaded. If you don't have that clicked, it does not do that. So you choose on which, what you want to do. So just keep that in mind. So you'll have to be loading the stat psych package each time that you want to use it. And so what I generally recommend is that you start with the library function, which the library function is what loads the packages. So library, and then you just type in stat psych, same way that you did that, same way that you did when you were installing it. And then you just click run. Could not find function. Let's see. Okay, you know what that means is I might have cleared. I might have cleared. I wonder why. Stats. I might have maybe spelled it wrong. Let's see. Okay, there we go. It loaded. Library. Oh, see, okay, I spelled it wrong. There we go. Okay, so this is a good lesson. I did spell library wrong. That's why it wasn't working. So anytime that you do get a kind of error message, so could not find function, it kind of tells you what's wrong with it. And that's one way that you can figure out that you did something incorrectly. Also, if it's not lighting up blue, that means R is not recognizing it. So in this example, R was not recognizing it, but I ran it anyway. Now it's blue. Now R recognizes that as a legitimate function. Anyways, so this is loading functions. We just loaded StatPsych. So now we have the ability to use StatPsych because we've loaded it into our environment. Okay. Let's now try running some basic commands. But before we do that, when you first install a package, right, you might not know what comes in the package. And so this tab right here, the packages tab, will run through all the packages that you have installed right now. And it's also, excuse me, another way that you can perhaps install more packages that you need. But the good part of this packages tab is that you can click on StatPsych. And what this does is it takes you to the repository of documentation and all the commands that are inside StatPsych from C to T. So confidence interval commands, CI. Then you've got prediction intervals, generating random samples of one and multiple variables, linear contrast, sample size planning. So all of these commands you can go through and see which ones you need. That's one way to do it. You can also search right here, since you have actually you would search right here because you'd want to find it inside the documentation. But let me show you one more way that you can pull up documentation before we continue. So let's say you do know about a function. So maybe you're interested in the function of mean, but you don't actually, let's go ahead and clear this just so we have it there. So let's say you know that there is a function called mean, but you don't know what the inputs are and you don't really know how it works. So one way to do it is to put a little question mark before mean. And so if you do that and you click enter, it'll take you to the mean documentation. And so what this will do, very handy tool, what this will do is it'll give you the function, right? It'll give you the usage. It'll give you what you need to put in the function, what kind of input it accepts. It'll tell you the arguments and what they mean, the inputs. It tells you the value. It gives you a nice reference for kind of who coded it in. And then it gives you an example. Super helpful. Gives you an example of how it would work. Right, so that's another way to pull up documentation for specific functions if you do know the function instead of searching it up here. That's what it essentially does, by the way. It just searches it up there, but it's kind of one less step that you have to do. Okay. Let's go ahead and practice with some basic R commands and functions. So after installing the psych-stat package, we can now use all the packages installed here. Let's try naming a variable. So a computer, right, much like a human, needs to learn language. And so you could think about R and RStudio just as an IDE, but RStudio is a very complicated, complex calculator, right? It's a computational device. And so what we need to do is we need to talk to it as you would to a calculator, right, with numbers. And you have to talk to it with something called syntax that it will understand. So in its language. And part of talking to computers in this language is defining variables. And so let's practice. So I already showed you earlier variables. So I showed you a little bit earlier, but a very simple way to define variables is just to say x equals 1, right? And then we've defined x as 1. But be careful, we didn't really define x as equals to 1 because we didn't run it yet. That's why we don't see it in our environment yet. So let's say x is equal to 1, right? We would run that. And now the computer knows, R knows that x is equal to 1. So you've equated x to 1. So now any operation that you would do, so for example, 1 minus x, is going to take x into consideration. And as you see, it's going to spit out a 0. So 1 minus 1 equals 0, right? That makes sense. So now any operation that you do, for example, 2 times x, we'll go ahead and multiply 2 by x, the x that you've saved in the environment. Okay, now that seems pretty simple, but just keep that in mind. Naming variables goes beyond just x equals to this. You can also name functions, which is very useful because you give them shortcuts, but also you can name commands that you run. So for example, data is equal to, and then you can choose to import data from different sources. So it's a very useful tool, but you do have to name things that you use, name the variables that you later want to use in R. So let's play around with a basic kind of computation. So let's go ahead. If we wanted to make x equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Let's say we wanted to make x equals that. There isn't, in the format that it's written right now, R will not recognize this this array. And the reason why is because you need a special function in order to combine the numbers into one vector. And so a vector is just simply a kind of a combination of values. So the function that I'm talking about is called the combine function. Combine, concatenate, it goes by different names, but the premise is simple. It's just that it combines the numbers into one group. So again, let's say we don't know what the combine function does. We would just put question mark and then C, and then we'd get the documentation for C and how it works, and then we can work through maybe an example. Okay, but since now we know what the concatenate combine function does, we can actually input it in with our data. And then here is, we'll put using the combine function. And so now what we've got is x equals combine 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, if we were to run that, x changed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now if we were to do 1 minus x, right, what it would do is it would subtract, 1 from all, wait, no, it would subtract x from 1 across the whole array, right? That's why you have -9, -8, -7. Okay. Same thing if you were to add 1. It wouldn't just add to the first number. There is a way that you can add just to the first value, but if you do it to the whole array, it will add 1 across all of the numbers. Okay. Now, let's try, since we've now defined one. Oh, I guess another really quick thing is that keep in mind that R updates variables as you update variables. So for example, since I've defined x equals 1 here, right? If I keep running, x will update. So if I want there's something to be a variable that's equal to 1 defined, I need to change this to y. Because in that case, now I'll have two variables, y equals 1 and x equals 1 to 3, 1 to 10. So just keep in mind as you go, it does update. And that's a pretty useful feature, but just keep that in mind. Okay. Now, let's try some basic descriptor data from this variable. Let's try to get that basic descriptor data. So the first thing we want to get, let's say basic descriptor data mean, we want to get calculating mean, median, let's do variance, standard deviation. I think that's good. We could do range, but I think we'll leave it with mean, median, variance, and standard deviation. Now, R it does have a complicated function for mode. Maybe you remember from basic measures of central tendency, mean, median, and mode. R actually does not have an easy function for mode. It's actually a little bit more complicated. So we'll just stick with mean, median, variance, and standard deviation. So how in the world do we do this? Well, first we would write in the functions, right? So if we don't know the functions, we would go to packages. We will go to stat.psych, that's the package that we're working on, and we would type in, say, mean. So in this case, since I know the mean function, I think the mean function is actually not included in stat.psych. It's actually just included in just the general general R platform. There we go. So the way that I would do it is just look question mark and then type in mean, and then it would show me what the function is for mean. I can do the same thing for variance. Whoops. Yeah, so on and so forth. So now that we know what the function is for mean, we can type in mean, and then we type in x because that's our variable. Then we go on down the road to median. Then what a handy thing that R does is actually it shows you the input arguments as you're typing it in. Very useful. So x, median of x. Oh, and this is how you would say it, by the way, mean of x, median of x. It's a function. And then variance is var. And we do that too. And then lastly, standard deviation is just SD, also of x. Okay, and so here are our basic mean, median, variance, and standard deviation of x. And so now, because we have x defined, we can just run these. X is defined as numbers 1 through 10. We can just run all of these sequentially. There we go. And in our console, R spits out the mean for numbers 1 through 10, the median for numbers 1 through 10, the variance, and the standard deviation of the numbers 1 through 10. So we've essentially created estimates with respect to our data from 1 to 10. Okay. And that's basically that. Let's see. Yeah. So I think the very last thing, at least for this video, is showing you how to save your work in R. I think that's a pretty important step. And the way that we would save our work, so we could save it a couple different ways. You can go to File, and then you could save it from here, right? Just like that. I would probably recommend saving it as, so that you can rename the file as you desire. You can also save it from there's this little button right here. It's like a little floppy disk, and it says save current document. That's another way to do it. And a third way to do it is with hotkeys. So this is hotkeys are just shortcuts on your keyboard. So for Mac, it's Command S will save. Will save the document, and for Windows, I believe it's Control S. So that's how you would save your work. So let's go ahead through and save our work. So we just click on save, and it'll take us to it'll take me to my Finder. If you're using Windows, you'll be taken to your own little thing. And so this I'll save as intro to our script. Okay. And then you could save it wherever you want to save it. Let's say I want to save it on my desktop. So it pops up there, and I click OK for it to save on my desktop. And should, I'm not mistaken, it should pop up on my desktop. There it is. There it is. So it popped up on my desktop right here. So why is saving your work so important? Well, saving your work is important because if something like this happens and you don't save our work, and for some reason your computer crashes, well, simply by opening up that saved file, you will be able to restore everything that you were working on. But be very careful. You will only be able to restore that which you save. It does not have an automatic save function. So as if you're working on something more complicated, do be sure to keep clicking save every like 5 minutes, just in case. But also another thing to keep in mind is the console will not save. The only thing that will save is your environment. And if not your environment, your script, right? This is the most important part, is your script, right? If you have that, you can recreate whatever variables you had in your environment. So simply by highlighting it all and clicking run, there we go. Actually, well, we didn't need to install it again, but it installed it anyway. The way to get around that is just to do that. But as you can see, now we have mean, median, variance, and standard deviation again, and we have our two variables right there back in our environment, X and Y. Okay, well, congrats. R has just gotten a little bit, hopefully, a little bit less scary and a little bit more exciting. I'll maybe see you in future videos. Okay, all right.